Welcome to Not Your Ordinary Parts podcast, a podcast where we talk about hard things associated with the human experience with the goal of increasing awareness, growth, and healing. You may hear information from professionally licensed therapists, doctors, healers, life coaches, etc. This information is not therapy and is not meant to replace actual therapy or instructions given by a doctor or personal therapist. I'm your host, Jalon Johnson. I am not a therapist. I have no background in psychology. I'm just an everyday guy. I don't feel like what I'm doing makes me special or better than anyone else. I just decided one day that I wanted more and that I wanted to heal the things that I was hiding. And I started my journey. So what you're seeing now is a byproduct of that decision. And I hope that what I'm doing is helpful to anyone else who has that same desire. My guest today is Marina Yanay-Triner. Marina is a compassionate somatic coach who works with people who want to experience more aliveness and deep transformation through a somatic body-based approach while addressing their stuckness, triggers, and regulating their nervous system. So Marina, welcome. Thank you for being my guest. I'm so happy that you agreed to do this with me. And I gave a bit of an introduction, but to allow the audience to know a little bit more about you, could you give a little bit more background about yourself, please?
Yeah, thank you for having me. And as I mentioned to you before we started recording, I'm so glad that you're doing this because I think that a lot of times listening to other survivors is more healing even than listening to coaches and therapists and stuff like that. So I'm also a fellow survivor of trauma. And I think it's very courageous to decide to go on a healing journey. I think a lot of people decide to just not decide consciously, but just stay living, feeling stuck, or just going with the flow of life without really pausing and checking in. So I just think it's courageous and it's also so worth it. Yeah, and I'm also a coach. So everything that I teach and share comes from my own experience and then my own learning about the nervous system and emotional healing and what our bodies can do on the trauma healing journey.
Gotcha. So you have a podcast as well, and I started listening to it. In episode 1, you tell the story about your family struggles leaving Ukraine and arriving in Israel. Would you mind talking about that a little bit, just to lay the groundwork for our discussion?
Yeah, for sure. I feel like my family story impacted me a lot, even before I was born. My mom told me the other day, she was telling about all of that to my grandma, and my grandma was like, "What? My story affects her? I don't get it." It's really cute. It's really new to her. But, even before that immigration, actually, we immigrated twice as a family. But even before that, my grandma was born in a labor camp in the Holocaust, and she always felt really lonely and really alone. She lost her mother a day after the camp was liberated. And so she always walked around with the story of nobody really loves me because I didn't have a mom. And it's crazy how our life reflects those events, right? Or that thinking, like our life starts to really reflect that. So she had a lot more losses in her life, of course, not her fault, but it's this vicious loop of we think that, and then we keep recreating it because that's what feels safe in our nervous system on a sciencey level, even though we don't want it, but we don't know anything different. So that's what she knew and kind of created. And then my family, I was born in Ukraine, and my family decided to leave. A lot of Jewish people really wanted to leave Ukraine, not just Jewish people, all kinds of people, but really wanted to leave Ukraine because communism was really hard. My family stood in lines for bread and things like that. Like, it was a really difficult life. They also faced a lot of racism and discrimination for being Jewish, and they would hide their identity very often. And then when I was 2, it was 1990, and that's when kind of communism started to fall apart. and we immigrated to Israel. That's a country that took in Jews pretty easily. And we kind of came in as refugees, which I only recently actually realized, because we had to leave all of our money. We had to leave a lot of things to be able to be allowed to move. So we came in more or less as refugees. And my mom recently told me that we basically got this transportation, for free from the airport. And they said, "Where do you want to go?" And we said, "We don't know. Like, we don't know anyone. We don't really know." So they just took us to a place. This is kind of a sad story. It's a hotel that was housing a lot of Ethiopian Jews, immigrants. And my family was so shocked by the cultural divide, because Ethiopian Jews really lived very differently. Obviously, like my mom said, they were burning a fire in the middle of the apartment or something like that. Wow. And my parents were like, "Oh my God," or my whole family, I guess, they were like, "How can we live with them?" Which is so sad, because they're really cool. But anyway, but then so my family just left and just stood on the street with all of their stuff, and they were just standing there and had really nowhere to go. And then a neighbor, a lady that was living nearby saw them, and she immigrated also from Ukraine, but a long time before, and she basically took us all in for a long time. So we got really lucky with this angel woman. But yeah, it was really crazy. And also, just, I wish that immigrants all bonded together more. That doesn't happen in Israel. I faced a lot of racism as well for being Ukrainian in Israel, because every wave of immigration that comes to Israel kind of dislikes the wave before. It's a very tragic thing. And then when we moved to the US, I was 12. That was actually a really good experience in terms of my race. I was very accepted, and people, other kids were very curious about me and asked me questions. But in general, I always have had this experience of being like weird or the other or different. So that I think a lot of people can relate to. That was really hard. And also just being really thoughtful, analytical, sensitive, also felt very different than all the other kids and all the other adults and everyone. So that's, a little bit of my story.
Okay. I appreciate that. And I'm sure as we continue to talk, we'll get into that more. And also, if anyone wants to listen to your podcast, you can give that information later. But we decided to do something a little different on this episode, because it was more so of telling stories. And when we had initially started talking, I had shared something with you that I wrote, and you told me, "Wait, I don't want to read all of it, because I want you to read it." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And then it was here on the podcast. So since you did a little bit of sharing, now it'll be me sharing, and I'm going to read what I wrote, and then we'll talk about it, and then we'll move forward with our conversation. But just a heads up, I'm just getting over COVID. So if I cough or if I stutter a little bit while I'm reading, I apologize, but I'll do my best. So I'll start to read it now. And this is just in line with the emotional healing that we were talking about. So I think it's kind of right on track. I've always felt something so deep, it seemed at times like my bone marrow was trying to communicate with me, but in a language I didn't understand. I could never really figure out what it was, but it always felt so big, and I was always led to believe it was nothing, or that I should shy away from it, which only made me want to connect with it more. I've always struggled to communicate my thoughts in a way that made me feel whole while trying to find words to vocalize deep feelings. It seemed like I had two left feet when I tried, and most times felt like I continually came up short. It was like the inner me, spoke a language that I couldn't articulate and failed miserably trying to translate. I know now that it is and has always been the language of emotion and it's the language my body speaks and was trying to tell me by and through my feelings. For me, doing the work where the real healing is without a doubt the emotional work. As far back as I can remember, I've had a deep emotional hunger, and now that I know what language my body speaks, I have to readjust my thinking to allow for emotional health and well-being just as much as I would for physical well-being. The crazy thing is that you can't have one without the other. Well, you can, but it'll only be temporary before your physical health starts to decline from a lack of being emotionally healthy. The mind-body connection is 100% real, and our mental and emotional health is connected to our physical health so deeply. Emotions can become trapped in the body if there's an interruption in their processing. Trapped or unprocessed emotions create a blockage in energy pathways, which can destroy tissue and even prevent organ function. Learning what emotional health looks and feels like to me means accepting that it's okay to feel comfortable being me, that I don't have to overthink things, feel guilt, fear, shame, or anything that I don't want to feel to meet expectations that don't align with my being. Also, that it's okay to set and have healthy boundaries that would prevent feeling like it's my duty to give until there's nothing left. I read something recently that said we treat dirt better than we treat ourselves. The soil in our gardens becomes nutrient deprived, and we'll add fertilizer so that there's something for the plants to be able to receive. But the dirt has its limits to where it can't give anymore. So a huge part of my emotional health is realizing and accepting that it isn't selfish to say no, regardless of how it makes anyone else feel, if I'm feeling depleted or recognize that I'm pouring from an empty cup. Little by little, I'm starting to understand bits and pieces of this language I couldn't speak. It has felt like there's a current that's existed, but it's only accessible at a certain frequency, like turning the dial of an AM radio until there's a clear signal. That frequency is my true self, and I couldn't speak the language of me because I was speaking a language of defensive and adaptive survival mechanisms. As I'm learning that it's okay to be me, to step into my power and be comfortable there, even if I'm the only one comfortable there, there's such a freedom that comes with it. I'm undoing what feels like programming into my DNA to accept anything and everything, no matter what, at all costs, like my life depended on it, even if it didn't feel good. Accept the way things have always been, traditions, concepts, ideas, others' behavior, etc., even if doing so is disruptive to my peace or emotional well-being. It felt like I was forced to accept and adapt to adult expectations and or ways of operating, while in the process being stripped of the ability to think and develop as a kid. Emotionally immature parents and grandparents who just barely survived the Great Depression, the Holocaust, genocide, slavery, etc., raised and trained the next generations, and surviving was literally all they knew. I think it's safe to say the trauma that they went through could have easily left them with PTSD, stress on top of stress, and probably before they were even aware or had just become accustomed to it, they were stuck in fight or flight because their nervous system was constantly on high alert. They were probably disempowered by the things that they had to survive, and ignoring their emotional wants and needs became commonplace. It seems like it was normal to be robotic in nature because there was no time to feel. Feeling didn't equate to surviving. You sucked it up, feelings and emotions, and you kept it moving. A lot of them just barely made it by the skin of their teeth, and to get through the things that they had to endure, they had to become survivors. If being numb and emotionless was all that they knew, and their kids were now programmed with these same survival mechanisms, minus all the reasons that they needed them, they'd have to go so far to get to a place of emotional health and stability. The generations that followed were left with so little to bridge the gap, but also given a box to think and operate from. There has always been so much pressure to be so many things except emotionally healthy. Be you, live your life, do this, make it look like this, achieve, don't make any mistakes, do it like this, perform, don't think that, don't feel that, make sure it doesn't affect anyone else. It's my way or the highway. Don't let the neighbors see. Don't be bothered by anything anyone else does. Always be giving, be super unselfish. But remember, you're not allowed to have different opinions, think or feel differently, and you can't have any personal preferences. It's been dysfunction 101 for so long, and so many are still failing the class. Also insert that you can't question the adults who gave the instructions because you have to respect your elders, even if it's known that they don't have the answers and will double down in their authority if their authority is challenged. I had to come to terms with the fact that even though my parents said they were fine, they ignored glaring deficiencies and reasoned that their problems could easily be solved by staying busy, ignoring them, or by praying for the most part. But are they or were they fine? And were their problems really solved? What's funny is that it feels like we'll talk about all the things, but no one wants to talk about the hard things, the things that get swept under the rug and avoided like the plague. Maybe it's that we don't know the path to freedom is through the fire. Maybe it's easier to avoid and then have all the reasons for the fallout after the fact. Why is it okay for some things to be okay and not others, but also the things that are okay would never be okay in any other setting? Why can't we talk about hard things? Why is it okay to sit in dysfunction and toxicity? I think we run from honesty because it requires reflection. Reflection requires acknowledgement, and acknowledgement requires change. It feels like most of us have become so accustomed to that's just the way things are that we've just accepted it and are used to it. It feels like we'll know something isn't good or good for someone and literally sit back and do nothing. For example, families will have a whole pedophile family member and never address it or speak about it, leaving the victim to figure it out on their own and inadvertently let the guilty one off the hook because it's easier not discussed or leave the past alone. It takes emotional maturity to even acknowledge a need and then be able to comfortably process and work through hard things. It's disappointing to see how effectively we've been removed from our source of power in what feels like connecting with. It's disappointing to see how effectively we've been removed from our source of power in what feels like the name of connecting with the source of power. We've been disturbingly divorced from who we truly are, which is where our power is. When we are forced to look at and acknowledge something different, whether it be a new way of thinking or horizons never known, they can't be unseen. And once seen, the color and taste of the immenseness of possibility will unlock and trigger change, even if we have grown accustomed to the way things are. We'll either change in that we make a choice to consciously ignore the urgings of the soul to expand, or we will step into the beauty of expansion and possibility. Once you get to a place of no return, your only worry is the best way to move forward. Brianna Wiest, in her book, 101 Essays That Will Change the Way You Think, said, "Sadness will not kill you. Depression won't either. But fighting it will. Ignoring it will. Trying to escape it rather than confront it will. Denying it will. Suffocating it will. Allowing it no place to go other than your deep subconscious to embed and control you will. Not that you'll take your life or destroy everything good you do receive, though you might, but it will kill you in that it will rob you of every bit of life you do have. You either let yourself feel everything or numb yourself into feeling nothing. You cannot select emotions. You are either in accord with their flow or in resistance to their nature. In the end, the choice is yours." I see now that's what we thought the rules were, but they don't have to apply and they can't apply anymore if I'm going to follow my hunger for the deeper things and my desire to walk in my fullness and power. Your life unfolds in proportion to your courage, and even though it's difficult, sometimes no matter how hard we try, there's just no way to hold back the river. So that was it.
Oh my God, that's so good. I really, really hope you write a book, first of all.
Thank
That
you. I
would be
appreciate
amazing. That. And I feel like, we are, we're like soul twins because everything you wrote spoke to me so deeply on so many levels. And also just the craving that we have to heal emotionally, right? And to have like deeper conversations. I think we both have that very deep craving. And I recently actually wrote this letter because I get very triggered by shallow conversations. And so I wrote this letter to my own shallow part, because, whatever we get triggered by is also within us. And it was almost like impossible to find her, because I spent my whole childhood just being like, I wish I was shallow so I can like bond with these kids, or, just feel more understood, because I always felt like I don't have that in me, because I've gone through so many things, and that's what I want to talk about. I don't want to talk about makeup and whatever. So yeah, that was so beautiful. I have so many things to say. Should I just like say them?
Sure, sure. Go ahead,
Okay.
please, by all means.
Well, let's see. Yeah, I think that what you talked about in terms of the adults in our life going through a lot of trauma and being really busy with that and not having the space to talk about emotions, to deal with their own emotions, that like accepting that is also going to help all of us accept ourselves, because I think the ability to hold anger and sadness and grief towards our caregivers, our parents, our grandparents, and all the ways that they neglected us emotionally, and being able to really have compassion towards them and to see where they're coming from at the same time, is one of the most healing things. I will argue, sometimes people get really mad at me for saying this, but this is just my opinion. You don't have to agree. I will argue that even if you were abused, it will help you heal if you kind of explore why this person did that to you. And it doesn't mean that you agree with it, and it doesn't mean that you celebrate it. It doesn't mean they didn't do anything wrong. But it's just, for me, it was very helpful to see, to understand that person was also traumatized, and how trauma is just a cycle that keeps moving and moving and moving in families and in generations. This person wasn't in my family, but I just see this cycle all the time. And once we can really hold, like you just did so beautifully, like we can hold that this is all the things that these people have been through, and these are the things that caused me, at the same time, I feel like that is probably the most healing thing.
How would you define trauma? But because you are what I would consider someone who's really versed in the nervous system. And trauma is something that affects our bodies and our nervous system so greatly. A lot of us sometimes say, well, I wasn't abused, or, I didn't have to deal with all the things that my ancestors dealt with. So have I really had to deal with trauma? So what would you call trauma, to kind of give a little bit of more understanding for people who are only thinking that it's, like wars and things like that?
Yeah, that's a really cool question. You just inspired me. I feel like I'm gonna write a post about this contradiction, because so many of us have these grandparents and parents that went through really intense trauma, like you said, slavery and the Holocaust and wars and all these things. And then we get affected by that, but we're like, I don't have a right to call what I experienced trauma when I look at my previous generations. And that is really damaging. So now, I guess, now that we are more physically safe, a lot of us, obviously not everyone, but a lot of us are more like physically safe as opposed to our grandparents and our parents. The kind of trauma that we experience can be really different. It can be more emotional trauma, which has a very similar effect. I remember when I was sitting in my first therapist's office, and she was telling me that there's this study on the survivors of sexual assault and how their PTSD is the same as war, like soldiers from war and Holocaust survivors. And that felt like so validating to me, because I was like, thank you. I've been feeling this forever and I couldn't put it into words. And now there's like the study about it. So that was really fascinating. So a simple definition to me of trauma is anything overwhelming. And that means that you're going through like anything that's threatening to you, which could be I'm 1 year old or even less, and I'm crying and no one's coming. So that is a trauma, because something overwhelming is happening and there's no resolution to it. So in essence, I don't have the capacity to fight or flee, and I don't resolve that threat. And that threat stays scary in my body. So I develop all kinds of ways to just deal with it, to just cope with that threat, that are really helpful to me in my life in that time. But then they become a problem because I'm operating my life as if this threat is still happening, but it's actually not happening anymore.
Wow. That was a great definition. Very, very good. Because like I was saying, if we don't think we deserve to say something has happened to me, we will never get to a point where we realize that we have something to heal. And then, like you said, we develop ways of dealing with it, which is dissociation. We dissociate from our bodies, from our emotions. My first question I was going to ask you, what happens when we dissociate from our emotions?
Yeah, that's exactly. Well, first of all, there's a dark side and a light side of trauma all the time. So the light side is we get to function, we get to survive, we get to exist and live our lives. And it's a way to cope because something happened that was too much, that was overwhelming. So when something happens that is too much, all these emotions come up, but I don't have the capacity and I don't have the resources. Both they can be physical or emotional. Like I don't have support from my family, or I don't have the internal maturity to deal with all this stuff that's coming up. So I just stuff it down. And what happens is that trauma continues to be my glasses for reality. And I'm viewing everything through these glasses. So let's say that now I'm just going to use a silly example, but I really want a new car. I really want to buy a new car. So I go into the dealership and I see the salesperson, and I immediately think that this person is lying to me and cheating and wanting to, sell this car to me, but they're not being kind. And I don't trust them, and I don't trust anyone. And so I just don't buy the car. I keep rejecting the car everywhere, and then I stay without a car. And that's just a simple example, but this can be about, much more important things. Like I don't connect with anyone. I don't connect with my partner. I don't even receive a partner into my life, or I don't trust people. I don't trust myself. I can't make decisions. All these things, because emotions give us information. And when we are constantly ruled by emotions from the past, fear will keep coming up and coming up and coming up, and we just stuff it down with thoughts maybe, or with drinking or whatever it is. All these coping mechanisms to just not touch upon that emotion because it's so intense and it feels like I don't know how to deal with this. I didn't know how to deal with it when the trauma happened, and I still don't know how to deal with it. So I'm going to develop all these mechanisms to cope with it. That can be drinking. That can also be exercising. That can also be eating really, really healthy, obsessively healthy, so that my brain is focused on that thing. So people think that addictions are just, alcohol and drugs, but I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but we're literally all addicts to something. So we're all kind of the same. We put, addicts into like a category, but in reality, like we all have addictions. And so we just develop these coping mechanisms so that we don't have access to that emotion, so that we stuff it down. I did that with over exercise, and I actually physically hurt my body. So it seemed very healthy on the outside, like a great addiction, but it wasn't. It wasn't, because it actually physically hurt me. And overdoing or underdoing anything is harmful. So all of that we do in order to not face those emotions.
I love the example you gave about the way we see things because of trauma. So actually we can get to a point where we start wearing glasses that blur our vision because of things that we've experienced. I don't think that anyone would ever think about it like that, but we wear trauma glasses. That's pretty crazy.
Totally. Yeah.
Okay, so what is the connection between the nervous system and emotions?
So that's a great question. Our nervous system is there, our autonomic or automatic nervous system is there to help us survive. So basically, its priority is to protect us. And so, for example, every emotion kind of has a message for us for our survival. So, for example, fear, fear is coming up probably when we go into sympathetic activation. So when we go into fight or flight, fear, which you talked about, fear is there to say, watch out, there's a threat. Sadness comes up when we are disconnected, because the ventral vagal state of our nervous system, when we are connected, when we're socially engaged, this connection is online. We're receiving connection, we're giving connection. And then when we're sad, you can really associate that with the dorsal collapse, meaning freeze, overwhelm, shut down. When I'm in freeze, I don't connect, right? I don't receive connection and I don't give connection. Maybe I'm disconnected from my body. Maybe I'm disconnected from others. And when you allow those emotions, they actually can help you. You have such good questions, because I feel like I'm saying things and I'm like, I never thought about it this way. So you're like sparking my mind right now. So when you're having emotions, they're allowing you to move through your nervous system states. Because let's say I am in fight or flight, right? I'm really anxious. Like I feel like there is a threat. What is the emotion? It's probably fear. Maybe it's rage as well. That could be rage or anger, frustration. I address that emotion. So I feel the fear. I feel it. I observe it. I notice that I express it. Maybe I shake, It's kind of like you can think of yourself as an animal in that moment. What would the animal do if it was super scared? Maybe shake, maybe run. So I do that. I allow my body to express that. And then a second later, I'm back to being regulated. I'm back to being in this ventral vagal state, meaning for anyone who hasn't studied the nervous system, it means that you are connected to other people, you're connected to yourself, and you're present. So let's say you're in shutdown. Let's say something so severe triggered you that you just kind of withdraw and you collapse and you are, just withdrawn from life, maybe dissociated. If you're able to access the emotion underneath there, maybe it's deep sadness, maybe it's disgust, it could be all other ones, but let's just say it's sadness. Let's say you can access it and you can feel it and you can express it. By the way, that doesn't mean you express it alone. Maybe you express it with a friend and the friend hugs you, or you hug yourself and you remind yourself that you're safe. You're coming back to ventral. So like actually listening to these emotions and expressing them brings you back into regulation.
Thank you for that explanation. What are some symptoms of nervous system dysregulation?
So I think of dysregulation not as being in a state where you're not present, because we all go into these states. That's normal. We don't want to get rid of them because that means we won't be able to actually attend to danger. Like if there's danger, I want to be able to, for my nervous system to subconsciously let me know that I need to run away or fight, or freeze. If the two choices are unavailable, if I can't fight or flee, then I freeze. But if I spend a really long time in those states, meaning I am anxious for a really long time after I get triggered, because when you think about it, I want you to kind of imagine, everybody listening, that you're a lion, right? And you're walking around and then there's a threat to the lion, whatever it is. What's a threat to the lion? Maybe that's a bad example. Maybe you're an antelope. I mean, I guess lions have threats too, but it would be easier to think about an antelope. So you're an antelope, you're walking around the savannah and you see the lion and you feel the threat, right? So you either run away and then you successfully have run away, or you hide, or you fight. Probably not. But let's just say the whole herd of the antelopes fights the lion. So when the threat is over and you're safe, you're an antelope. You're not sitting there being like, oh my gosh, that was so scary. What should I do now? And then your whole life is consumed by, when is the next lion going to come? Oh my God, right? You're fine. Like you have worked through the threat and then you're just back to being an antelope on the savannah, walking around feeling safe. So that's the idea of regulation. It's the ability to like freak out for a second, get activated, do something about it, and then come back to chilling in life. And I wish that upon all of us. And I know that some triggers are so intense that we get stuck in them for a really long time. So the idea is a kind of a game with yourself. Like, okay, last year I got triggered and I would literally spend 5 days feeling triggered. Maybe this year I can spend 4. Maybe next year I can spend 3. And then we go down to hours. And that's what regulation is about.
Wow. I was reading, I can't remember, it was some post that it talked about how humans are different than animals. And it was the same example of the antelope being chased by a lion. And let's say, the antelope is able to escape. It'll shake vigorously for a few minutes and then all of that energy is gone. So as humans, if we don't have that same mechanism to remove the energy, it's stuck in our body. And the number of times that there's a threat for us, whether it be, road rage in traffic, or issues at work, or, COVID, or 9/11, or, there's so many things that we don't shake out. So we're literally walking around with so much bad energy, and it's just no wonder why we're sick. So I appreciate that example. What can childhood emotional neglect look like in adults?
I have the book right next to me, Adult Children of Emotionally Mature Parents. Have you read that one?
I have. That book is incredible. It took me a long time because it was so heavy. I would have to put it down, but it's really good.
Yeah, it's definitely triggering for those of us who can relate to it. Yeah, it's a great book. There's so much, but the basic thing is, and so many of my clients fit into this category, I think because I do, so I can actually support them. It's a fear of emotions. So on top of having an emotion, there's also a fear of the emotion. That's a big one, and kind of avoiding those emotions through coping mechanisms. Maybe lashing out at other people, not apologizing, all these behaviors that you're like, why did I do that? It's so icky. Shame around those behaviors because that's what we observed in our parents, or we never got the tools to process our own emotions. And that affects pretty much every part of life. It's crazy, but it really does. So, the inability to apologize, the inability to stay present in a conversation, because there's emotions that are coming up for you and you're like, I don't know what to do with this. Okay, I'm just going to be mean to the other person, or I'm just going to walk away, or whatever it may be. Other things, basically, given enough stress, we kind of revert back in age. So we act like we are little kids, or we act like we're teenagers instead of mature adults. And mature adults can know how to say, a lot is coming up for me right now, I need a moment, instead of lashing out at the other person. So they know how to take that break. They know how to process their own emotions. Maybe we're really stuck in life. We're not moving forward because something triggers an emotion. So instead of dealing with that emotion, we're procrastinating that something. So there's so many things in life that depend on actually being able to feel our emotions so that we can take action, so that we can thrive, so that we can achieve our goals, all of that.
So, excuse me. What are some of the techniques and methods that you use to help your clients heal emotionally and regulate their nervous systems?
This is a very slow process. First off, I always start with the nervous system regulation so that when you access an emotion, it can feel more safe. Because the idea is, Peter Levine calls this titration. Like, we don't want to, I kind of often use this image of a pool. So I tell them, imagine that there is a beautiful pool or lake of water, and that's your emotion. So I want you to approach that lake as if you're just going to stand next to it. You're not even going to dip your toe yet. You're not going to swim. You're just literally looking at it, and it's like kind of far away, and you're just observing it. And that's kind of the first step. And before even that, I make sure that they are regulated. So that means noticing, are they feeling shut down? Are they feeling really anxious? And how can we move that along? So that can be by making a sound, like the VOO sound, by humming, by moving. There's so many somatic techniques that we can do that kind of allow this energy, like you said, the stuck energy, to move through without thinking about it, without analyzing, without anything. Just, oh, I feel my whole body collapsed. Okay, let yourself collapse. Just be with that, be with that. Maybe grab a blanket. What can help you feel more safe? Maybe imagine all the people that you love surround you and hug you. There's so many kind of visualizing tools, and also like expressing with sound and movement. So that's kind of the first step. And then from there, we'll check in. Is there an emotion? Where is it? Where do you feel it in your body? Can you access it? Does it feel overwhelming right now? If it feels overwhelming, let's come back to it tomorrow. So it's slow on purpose, because it took me forever. So I know it takes people a long time, and that's really normal, because we want to teach our body that emotions are not scary, that they are just energy, and then we can access them and we can observe them. So for example, if I ask someone, they're saying, I feel sadness. Well, how do you know that? Oh, my chest feels tight. And I'm also gauging by their answers how connected they are to their body. Because they might say, I don't know. I have no idea how I know that. I think that I'm sad. So then we have to learn how to even connect to our body first. And then once we do, and people can say, oh, my chest feels really tight. Okay, great. It's amazing that you're aware of that you're noticing that. And is it okay that we stay with this tightness right now? So I really like my clients to lead me rather than me lead them, because I'm checking that they're present in their body, that they're staying in their body through the emotion. So if you're having an emotion and it's really, really overwhelming, and you notice that you're leaving your body, then come back to those regulation tools. Whether it's the VOO, there's something called the butterfly hug, which looks like this. It's from EMDR. Any
Mm.
regulation tool that works for you, come back to that and then check in with the emotion again. And then see if you can stay with it and really observe it. And last step is to express it. So this also took me a long time, especially if there's someone else present, because I did not like, and I think a lot of children of emotionally immature parents, they don't feel safe to express an emotion with someone watching them. So it took me a while with my own coach. And so expressing could look like roaring, could look like crying, could look like screaming, could look like, ugh, yuck, going, whatever sound or movement or sentence could look like saying no. All of that is expressing your emotion. And then once you really do that, you can feel all the space in your body that comes, and it's really lovely.
Wow. What does somatic mean? Like, if you're a somatic healer, what does that mean for people who've never heard of it?
It means of the body. So, there's some approaches out there that are about talking about trauma. And personally, and somatic just simply means of the body. So it can be involving touch, it can be involving sound, it can be involving your sensations, your emotions. Personally, I combine a lot of things. So I'm not a fan of only being in the body for an hour. Number one, because it can be so overwhelming. And a lot of my clients will literally start with 5 minutes, and then we expand the time in the body for as long as feels good, and again, that they're present. But then the other thing is, talking can be so validating too, and having someone say, oh my God, I'm so sorry you went through that. That was probably so hard. I think that's so important. I remember I had one client that I could tell this client had a lot of trauma. I could feel it, but I was like, what happened? Like, it wasn't clear. I didn't know the story, but I could just feel it by this person's like responses and ways of being. And once this person started telling me, their story, and that of course made it very clear why their body feels the way it does. But then also, I think it's so healing when someone else witnesses you and really recognizes, oh my God, that sucks. Like, that should not have happened to you. That was not fair that it happened. So I kind of combine all those approaches.
What do you see most of as far as trauma in your clients, like childhood trauma? Because even I know some people who, well, of course, there's war veterans, people who have been in a car accident. There are so many things that we don't consider trauma, but like if you're in a car accident and you're scared to drive again, that's because you were traumatized. What is something that you see a lot of in your clients that is a big one that you work with to heal?
So I'm not a therapist, and even though I feel like all trauma is trauma and I could work with anyone truly, I personally most enjoy working with emotional trauma. That sounds very weird. I know that I enjoy it, but I just relate to it more, even though I've actually been in car accidents. I feel like there is certain things that therapy is really effective for. And that is, it's effective for a lot of things, but I feel like, war veterans and sexual assault survivors benefit from therapy, somatic therapy, so much. And I guess it's also because coaching's expensive. That's the reality. Coaching's really expensive. I work with very few one-on-one clients at this point. So I feel like if someone needs a lot of years of therapy to kind of come into a state where they are present to their life, like they're really in a state, and no judgment, because I was in that state myself. Therapy would be wonderful for them. And maybe we could tag team. Like, I love when my clients go to therapy and work with me at the same time. I find that it's so beneficial. But my favorite clients to work with, that I feel like I am very good with are people who have abandonment, rejection, pain from childhood. It might not even be things that they remember, but they know it due to their triggers in their life. So they've had parents who were emotionally neglectful of them, were not there for them when they were sad. Maybe there was a big divorce in the family and no one was there for them through it. I'm thinking of, different clients. Maybe there was even physical abuse, emotional abuse. They just felt alone. They felt alone with their big emotions as children, and no one was there for them. So it's not a one-time event. I guess that's what I'm distilling it to. It's not the one accident and they kind of need to move through that, but it's more a prolonged process that they went through as a child of neglect and possibly abuse. I really get that. So I find that it's helpful to work with me because I don't work with my clients as the coach. I really try to work with them as a human and to say, yesterday I was really depressed myself and this is what I did. I think we need that. I think therapy is great, but the limitation of therapy is that most, not every, but most therapists don't really show up as humans. They're really blank slates, which can be super helpful for a lot of things. But I think having a coach who's like gets you and is with you in this pain is just very, very healing too.
I think it's relatability. I remember my first therapist, we got really deep into a lot of things. And at a certain point, I kind of felt a shift because I don't think as a therapist, you can be attached emotionally to your client because at that point, you can no longer speak objectively. So I can understand your point about the different aspects of therapy that maybe not be able to give you everything that you need. Also, the healing process is difficult. It's hard. And it takes someone who's very courageous to really sit with themselves and feel their feelings, their big feelings, and to do the work. Because of who you are, if you could use your platform to encourage someone who's struggling with their emotions and their emotional health, what would you tell them?
I would tell them that it makes sense that they're resisting it. And instead of getting mad at the resistance or trying to push through it and really push through the process, how can you get curious about your resistance? So actually like sit with your resistance, notice it, and listen to what it has to say. Notice what it's scared of. Notice what it wants and desires. And just like literally like the parent that you wish you had, that was like, what's going on? Tell me all about it. I'm here for as long hours. I'm here for hours. Like, let's go. Tell me everything. Like, I'm just here for you right now. That's how I want you to talk to your resistance and actually have no agenda. Like, don't have the agenda of making it go away, fixing it, shutting it up. Literally just be with it.
Thanks. That was good. Well, I want to say that I am super grateful for having the opportunity to do this with you and for you to see me. I think that's a big thing for me, is actually being seen by people that I look up to and that people I rely on for encouragement and support. Because, and this is my opinion, of course, I don't feel like there are a lot of people from where I'm from or who look like me or in my age group who are really running toward the fire. You know what I'm saying? Like who want healing so bad that they will avoiding, who want to do the work and are hungry for the work. So it's a big deal for me to be what I consider that person, and at the same time to be
It's huge.
getting seen. by individuals such as yourself. So thank you so much for sharing your story and your knowledge and your time. If someone
Yeah,
wanted
thank you.
to go ahead, go ahead.
I'm just so excited to speak with you. I think that you have brilliant questions, and I feel like I got so inspired by our conversation. And I agree with you. I think first of all, just being a man, like that's so important that you are speaking from that place. And also in the Black community, I feel like there's so much trauma and there's so much pain that's not being spoken about. And I'm so happy that you're doing this. And I know you probably feel alone very often. I know I do, even though I'm a woman and there's like so many women into this kind of work, but still. But I know that there are people listening to this that totally relate to you and that you're inspiring so much.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that. And I mean, like I said, I don't feel like I'm anybody special. I just know that there are people who can hear this and it will help them. And that's really all I want. Because if I had, my neighbor or someone at work or just someone that I could relate to talking about things like this, I would have been like, well, wow, I would have got curious a lot sooner. So, like I said, if
Totally.
I can be a bridge to anyone else, I'm happy to do it, because if I can shave 2 or 3 years off of their time to get to a good place of, emotional healthiness and healing, I'm all for it.
Yeah.
So where can people
So your
find
other
you
question?
online and social media?
Yeah. So easiest place is Instagram at marina.y.t. And now the podcast, which is so exciting. And I have to say, I'm having the best time with the podcast. I just love like long form content, and that's what it's allowing me to do. So the podcast is called Deep Within, and you can find it on all the platforms.
Nice. Alrighty. Well, again, I want to say thank you so much for your time, for your knowledge, and being willing to do this with me. I'm so grateful. And hopefully, if there's anybody who listens to this and it helps them, we've done our job.
For sure. Thank you.